Good evening, Bill.
I understand you were an observer at the Catalan vote earlier this month. What did you see and what do you make of what happened?
Yes, I was an international visitor at the referendum in Catalonia. I was there for about a week before, during and after the referendum. I travelled quite widely around Catalonia and saw enormous support for the referendum and established support for both no and sí sides of the debate. I also saw some Spanish unionists attacking Catalonians who were carrying the Catalunya Estelada. And I observed the referendum, a number of polling stations on the day. I observed the count itself, and I visited some of the polling places where the Police Nationale effectively broke into the school, fired rubber bullets, and removed the ballot boxes and the votes that were within them. After, of course, the referendum, there were some strikes, and I observed that as well. So it was a very interesting experience, quite a humbling one, and quite a shocking one to have seen such unprecedented violence visited upon citizens who simply wanted to exercise a vote.
And yet some would say, was it democracy because only 43% turned out? Are you suggesting that actually more than 43% would have turned out or could have turned out, but couldn't as a result of the authorities' actions?
I think far more than 43% did turn out. I think the true figure is probably more like 57%, something like that, when you take into account the almost 800,000 votes that were confiscated by the Spanish authorities, the Spanish police. In addition to that, my experience was that some people chose not to vote because of the levels of intimidation that were promised by the Spanish government. So a number of people were frightened away from exercising their vote. Notwithstanding all of that, well over 2 million people did exercise their vote, and I thought the vote itself was conducted properly, fairly, robustly. The counting processes were scrutinised very heavily, and I thought it was a credit to the Catalonian government that they were able to have a referendum of that quality.
But the referendum hasn't been organised by the international community. What do you make of the fact that it seems like the rest of the world has turned its back on Catalonia, and indeed you're very critical of the EU, saying the leaders there in the EU are defending the indefensible. Well, aren't they actually defending the law? Because the Catalan leadership were breaking the Spanish constitution.
Well, I think some of the briefings that I've received suggest that the case for the referendum is at the very least arguable. It certainly seems to have had the international law on its side, and I think that given that the Spanish government historically have incorporated international law into domestic law in Spain, I think that the referendum held by the Catalonian government is potentially legal. I think it's reported differently in the mainstream media, clearly, but I think that there is some good evidence to suggest that the vote should have taken place, did take place, was subject to extreme action by the Spanish government, and it's very, very disappointing that the European Union in particular has not developed a view on that and has not condemned the violence that was supported by the Spanish government.
I must get your reaction as a former SNP MP. Your party is saying it has no plans to recognise Catalan's independence. What do you make of that, and also the impact on what's happening in Catalonia with what's happening in Scotland and its interest in independence?
Well, the last question first, perhaps. I think there are a number of lessons for Scotland and for the Scottish Government in terms of what has taken place in Catalonia and the way that the referendum was structured and implemented. I think if the Scottish Government chooses not to recognise the vote and not to recognise Catalonia as a country, that would be very, very disappointing indeed.
Just finally, you're worried about the scale of violence that could ensue. What's next for this incredibly unprecedented situation we're seeing in Spain?
Well, I think Spain itself has got some real challenges now. I think Spain has got to demonstrate to the rest of the world that it is a modern liberal democracy and one that's fit to be a member of the European Union. I think that history, that reputation was severely tarnished on the 1st of October. I think Spain has got to rebuild its credibility. I think it does that by talking with the Catalonian government and not trying to repress the will of the people of Catalonia.